In this video, we are going to talk about the history of cars. So before starting, please like this video and subscribe to this channel for future updates. The car was created and refined in Germany and France in the late 1800s, but Americans swiftly dominated the business in the early 1900s. By the 1920s, Ford, GM, and Chrysler were the big three automakers. After World War II, manufacturers boosted output in Europe and Japan to satisfy rising demand. By 1980, the industry had become a worldwide company, with Japan being the dominant car maker. The car was refined in Germany and France at the end of the 19th century by men like Gottlieb Daimler, Karl Benz, Nikolaus Otto, and Emil Levasseur. When were cars invented? The 1901 Mercedes, created by Wilhelm Maybach for Daimler Motor and Gesellschaft, was the world's first modern vehicle. Its 35 horsepower engine weighed under 14 pounds per horsepower and had a peak speed of 53 miles per hour. Daimler employed over 17,000 employees in 1909 to build less than 1,000 automobiles per year at Europe's most integrated plant. The stark difference between this first Mercedes and Ransom E. Olds 1-cylinder, 3 horsepower, tiller-steered, curved-Oldsmobile from 1901 to 1906 exemplifies the supremacy of European design. The Olds sold for $650, making it affordable for middle-class Americans, and the 5,508 units produced in 1904 broke all prior records. Combining the superior design of the 1901 Mercedes with the reasonable pricing and low running costs of the Olds was the key technological challenge of the first decade. This would be a major American achievement. Henry Ford and William Durant. Springfield, Massachusetts bicycle mechanics J. Frank and Charles Durant designed the first successful American gasoline car in 1893, won the first American car race in 1895, and sold the first American-made gasoline car the following year. In 1899, 30 American manufacturers manufactured 500 cars, and 485 more entered the industry in the next decade. William Durant created General Motors in 1908. The new enterprises competed in an unprecedented seller's market for a high-priced good. The United States, with its huge land area and scattered settlements, required significantly more automobile transportation than Europe. A greater per capita income and more fair income distribution than European countries also assured high demand. Model T. It seemed inevitable that more vehicles would be built in America than in Europe, given the manufacturing heritage. The absence of interstate tariffs promoted sales across state lines. Cheap raw resources and a persistent dearth of competent workers spurred early industrial automation in the U.S. This necessitated product standardization and led to mass manufacture of things like weapons, sewing machines, bicycles, and many more. In 1913, the U.S. manufactured 485,000 of the world's 606,124 automobiles. Ford outperformed its competition in combining cutting-edge design with reasonable pricing. The 4-cylinder, 15 horsepower, $600 Ford Model N, 1906 to 1907, was described as the first instance of a low-cost motorcar operated by a gas engine with cylinders adequate to provide the shaft a turning impulse in each shaft turned by Cycle and Automobile Trade Journal. With so many requests, Ford upgraded production equipment and could supply 100 vehicles per day by 1906. Encouraged by the Model N's success, Henry Ford set out to create an even better vehicle for the masses. The 4-cylinder, 20 horsepower Model T sold for $825 in October 1908. Its 2-speed planetary transmission and removable cylinder head made it easy to drive and repair. Its high chassis was made to handle bumpy country roads. Vanadium steel made the Model T lighter and stronger, while innovative casting techniques, particularly for the engine, kept the price down. Automotive industry growing pains. Other American automakers swiftly embraced Ford's mass manufacturing methods. European manufacturers started using them in the 1930s. The higher capital expenditures and sales volume required by this terminated the period of easy entrance and freewheeling rivalry among many small companies in America. The industry's output was dominated by Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, which Walter P. Chrysler created from Maxwell in 1925. The Great Depression took off most of the remaining independents, with Nash, Hudson, Studebaker, and Packard surviving until post-war collapse. The Model T was designed to be a farmer's car for a country of farmers. Its popularity waned as the country developed and rural areas emerged from the mud after the 1916 Federal Aid Road Act and the 1921 Federal Highway Act. Even after technical advancements, the Model T remained mostly unaltered. Owners of Model Ts were upgrading to larger, quicker, more luxurious automobiles. As the market grew saturated in the 1920s, the Model T's fundamental transportation requirement was increasingly satisfied by second-hand vehicles piling up in dealer lots. GM introduces planned obsolescence. Consumers were satiated while technology stagnated. It was becoming more gradual than dramatic in product and manufacturing technologies. The self-starter closed all-steel body, high-compression engine, hydraulic brakes, synchromesh transmission, and low-pressure balloon tires were all available by the late 1920s. The automatic transmission and the drop-frame architecture emerged in the 1930s. Moreover, automobiles were built in the early 1950s in much the same way as in the 1920s. The annual model change exemplifies the mostly cosmetic planned triennial major restyling to coincide with the economics of die life, with annual minor facelifts in between. The idea was to dissatisfy buyers enough to trade up to a more expensive new model before their current car's useful lives expired. Sloan believed that the corporation's principal aim was to create money, not only to build cars. He argued that GM's automobiles just needed to be equal in design to our competitors' finest. It was not required to lead in design or risk untested experiments. So engineering became a slave to stylists and accountants. General Motors became the model of a logical, technostructure organization. In the profitable low-priced area, Ford lost sales lead to Chevrolet in 1927 and 1928 as Sloanism superseded Fordism. By 1936, GM owned 43% of the U.S. market, Ford had 22%, and Chrysler had 25%. World War II and the auto industry. During World War I, the automotive industry was vital in providing military vehicles and equipment. During World War II, American automakers produced 75 critical military components, most of which had nothing to do with cars. These items were worth $29 billion, or one-fifth of the nation's military production. Because civilian car production ended in 1942 and tires and fuel was rationed, wartime vehicle traffic declined substantially. Automobiles that had been nursed through the Depression were patched up further, assuring high pent-up demand for new cars following World War II. Post-war Detroit's Big Three carried Sloanism to its absurd conclusion. Every year, automobiles got longer, heavier, more powerful, more gadget-laden, more expensive to buy and maintain, following the truth that huge cars sell better than little ones. Rise of Japanese automakers. Post-war engineering was subjugated to non-functional style at the price of economy and safety. By the mid-1960s, American-made automobiles had an average of 24 problems per unit, many of them safety-related. Moreover, Detroit's higher unit profits on gas-guzzling road cruisers came at the expense of increasing air pollution and depletion of global oil supplies. As gasoline prices soared following the 1973 and 1979 oil shocks, and especially as German Volkswagen Bug, a modern Model T, and then Japanese fuel-efficient, functionally designed, well-built vehicles began to penetrate both domestic and global markets, the era of the annually restyled road cruiser came to an end. After reaching a record 12.87 million units in 1978, American vehicle sales declined to 6.95 million in 1982. As imports grew their market share from 17.7% to 27.9%. Japan became the world's largest vehicle producer in 1980, and it still is. U.S. Carmakers Retool. In response, the American car industry experienced enormous organizational and technical changes in the 1980s. GM, Ford, and Chrysler became leaner, tougher, with lower break-even thresholds. allowing them to retain profits with reduced volumes in increasingly saturated, competitive markets. Manufacturing quality and staff engagement activities were prioritized. In 1980, the industry embarked on a 5-year, $80 billion facility refurbishment initiative. Detroit studios abandoned annual aesthetic changes in favor of functional aerodynamic design. Cars become smaller, more fuel efficient, cleaner, and safer. Computer-aided design, engineering, and manufacturing (CAD/CAM) were progressively rationalizing product and production. Legacy of the U.S. Auto industry. The vehicle-shaped 20th century America. A new consumer-oriented society arose in the 1920s. It ranked number 1 in product value by the mid-1920s and generated 1 in 6 employment in 1982. The vehicle became the lifeblood of the petroleum business, a major steel client, and a major user of other industrial items in the 1920s. Its needs altered auxiliary industries' technology, notably steel and petroleum. The vehicle boosted outdoor leisure and tourism-related companies including service stations, roadside eateries, and hotels. The Interstate Highway Act of 1956 launched the greatest public works program in history. For example, the vehicle provided better medical care and schooling to rural America, while paradoxically the farm tractor made the traditional family farm obsolete. Transportation has created the contemporary metropolis with its industrial and residential suburbs. The vehicle revolutionized the American house's architecture, redefined the urban neighborhood, and liberated homemakers from the restrictions of the home. No other historical factor has so profoundly altered American culture. In 1980, 87.2% of American households had 1 or more cars, and 95% of domestic automobile purchases were for replacement. Americans are car dependent. Did you know these facts before? Let us know in the comment box below. Please like this video and subscribe to this channel for our future updates. Thank you.